Please. Okay. All right. So let's start with um, let me share my screen. And this all started with Jill. They're going to blame Jill.
It's okay.
And so no, actually it was a good question. And so I sent this out to all of you, I believe. And so I took Carolyn Buchanan's list of paints. So she, in her little article, she described all these different properties of paints. And so you've heard me talking about staining colors before, and those are the ones that they actually soak into the fibers of the paper, and so they are typically very difficult, if not almost impossible, to get out entirely. You can usually lighten them up a fair amount, but you can't ever really get that base color totally gone. Um, Now, I was really surprised. Now, I don't actually, and that her list had links in it, some of which I have accidentally eliminated as part of adding in all the other properties of the paints. But this one, she literally is using alizarin crimson, and I am amazed she's using it because it is highly fugitive. So I always talk about late fastness and make sure you're not buying fugitive paints. Fugitive paints are going to disappear within 5 years, and you will no longer have that color in your painting. So why this woman who was honored enough to get an article on Daniel Smith paints is using alizarin crimson, which is only one of three colors in Daniel Smith's entire array of colors that is fugitive, I have no idea. Obviously, I totally disagree with her. So I've added to her list permanent alizarin crimson. Um, and it has an excellent light fastness. Yes, it takes three colors to accomplishment. It is not a single color pigment, and I do like single color pigments, but I want a color that's going to last. Uh, so, so that was the only change I made to her list. And the reason I decided to go ahead and add in these additional properties, which I got out of Daniel Smith's interactive color map, was just so that we could sort of compare and see. So she's saying these are staining colors, and are they all staining colors? Well, they are, but although some of them are low staining, but they are still staining. A couple of them are low staining. Um, Most of them were in the medium or high staining level. So, um, and then she mentioned a couple of quinacridones, which were also listed separately in another part of the list. So I just didn't bother to expand them here because they're expanded on the quinacridone part of the sheet. Um, Most of the staining colors, let me see if I'm going to say, make the statement. I'm going to say most of them are non-granulating. So I'm just now I'm going to kind of look at the granulating, and one of them here, Prussian blue, is granulating, and so is Payne's gray, but everything else is non-granulating, and that's typical. So for a sort of a general rule of thumb, well, there's sort of two things. If the name of the paint sounds like a chemical name and not like a a name that you know otherwise. So like alizarin, anthraquino, I don't even know how to pronounce this one. I'm going to say anthraquinoid. Um, I don't think of that as a chemical sounding name. Um, Pyrinone. So, when I struggle over the names, I always know these are synthetic paints, and synthetic paints are nearly always staining and not granulating. So it's sort of a quick thing if you look at one of your tubes and it's got phthalos, all the phthalos are staining and non-granulating. Now, a few of them, I don't know what goes into making Prussian blue. It got a name at some point in history because that color, I have heard that color name for forever, including back when I did oil paints in my teens. So who knows how that's made? Maybe it is still also a synthetic paint. I don't know what is it does granulate. So the fact that it granulates tells me it's probably not a synthetic paint. So anyway, that's just some rules of thumb that you can use to kind of help you out. Um, I have seen both terms used, sedimentary and granulating. You'll hear me most often I say granulating. They really mean the same thing. And in that case, the particles of the paint tend to be larger and they don't go in, so they're not staining, and they don't go into the paper, so they just kind of nestle in the little texture of the paper. So I didn't mark anything else on these paintings, on these colors. Most of them say that they are either low staining or non-staining. So typically, granulating colors do tend to lift pretty well. So if you put down some color and you want to be able to remove it, typically you can get them back pretty close to white, maybe not pure white. And I'm actually, while I'm talking about this, I'm also going to point out this book. Is it backwards for you guys?
No.
Okay, because I look in my camera and it's backwards. This Zoltan Szaba, I don't know if he's still alive or not. He was born in 1928, but he has written a few different instructional books, and I have found them both to be really, really well done. Um, and his,
April,
yeah,
for some reason I can't see. What is it?
yeah.
I
So
can't.
it's called 70 Favorite Watercolor Techniques. And his name is spelled, let me put it in the chat so you can see it. It's Zoltan. He's originally from Hungary. And his last name, Szabo, is Szaba.
Okay.
Um, so
Then
the very first chapter in this book is called Qualities of Transparent Watercolor Pigments. And so he talks about all of these properties. And so he starts out with what he calls transparent colors. And you may recall that in her article, Carolyn said they were transparent colors, but she thought of them more as luminous colors, which I thought was very interesting because I reread, let's see. Hey, Betsy made it. Hi, Betsy.
Hi, Betsy. Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah,
Okay, good. That's a first.
I wonder why I'm echoing. Let's hope that stops. Why am I getting echoes? That's driving me nuts. Are you guys hearing it?
Now?
Yes, no?
Yes, no. I can hear you.
Yeah, but am I?
Yeah, but am I?
I'm hearing myself.
I'm hearing myself.
Let's see.
Do you want?
Okay.
Okay.
It's a little.
It's a little.
Why don't you all turn your mics off for now while I'm talking, and that might reduce. Yeah, I think that's gonna. I think what's happening was it was getting to somebody's end and then bouncing back, and so I was hearing myself talk, and then it was really confusing me because it was delayed. Anyway, um, he talks about transparent colors. Um, his list has some similarities, but they're well, they both have Aurelian. Yeah, she only has Aurelian, Cobalt Blue, and Viridian, and he the only thing he had in common was Aurelian. Now, he tended, I don't remember if he said in the book which colors he was. So he had kind of like four different palettes, four different manufacturers that he used. Originally, like most people, he had Winsor Newton because Winsor Newton has been around for many, many, many years. So even when he started painting when he was young, Winsor Newton already existed. And then he, over time, found that he liked a couple of other manufacturers. I don't think he was still, I don't know if he was still alive or if he was still analyzing paints or not when Daniel Smith came out, because they're relatively new company. The last company he mentioned that he liked was an Italian paint called Mirabelli or something like that. Let's see if I can find it. No, it's Maimeri, so not knowing Italian, um, it looks kind of like May Mary to me, but I don't know the correct pronunciation. Um, so I'm not sure when he lists colors in here, and he does talk about the fact, and which is also very true, that every company, they all have cerulean blue. They're all going to be different, and their properties are going to be different. So when he's categorized them here based on whatever company he had decided he was using, they may not fall in the same categories for us, depending on what brands we have. So you can't just say, oh, okay, well, he said permanent rose was transparent. It may not be in the brand you use. So basically testing is the best thing you can do. He showed in his book the same thing that I showed at our last class, where putting down the black marker line and then painting over it. And on the transparent colors, all you see is the black line. There's absolutely no hint of the color on top of it. And that's how you know something is transparent. He then talks about opaque colors, and he's got the line again. And in this case, the colors, it might not be coming through on my camera. I don't know how well it's appearing, but actually I'm holding it to my camera, but my camera is not what's being spotlighted right now. Let me stop sharing for a moment. And I will spotlight myself. Let's see. So on the opaque colors, you can see that the color is going over the line. This one is the most obvious, but on all of them, you can see it pretty well in the book. It's not coming through real well on Zoom, but on all of them, they are covering the line at least to some level of opaqueness. Then he talked about reflective color, and reflective color was sort of interesting to me because I've never heard anyone use that term before. And he referred to it as being the opposite of true transparent. Okay, so his description was they let the light penetrate through the wash and reflect from the paper like a transparent color would, but they also have a certain amount of light that doesn't get through the color, and it also bounces back. So you're not, so on his little line, so he's got a little line again, right, with the colors over it. And you can see just a teeny tiny bit in real life. Again, the camera may not be picking it up, but there's a little bit of the color on top of the line, and that is what he's referring to as it still bounces off the paper and comes back, but you're getting a little bit more of that color also mixed in, more than you do on the transparent colors. So the transparent colors, I'll go back to her list. She uses Aurelian, Cobalt Blue, and Viridian, and in one part of the article, I think she said she liked to start paintings with transparent colors. And then later in the article, she said she liked to start some paintings with staining colors. So I think maybe it depended on the subject matter. I don't think she explained it, why sometimes it was one versus the other. But because she made that comment about what she starts the painting with, I thought I would talk about what I often start the painting with. So if I'm using a triad, and not like, my purple, green, yellow, variation, then I do use cobalt blue. Cobalt blue is in my first wash. The other thing about transparents is they tend to be lighter colors. They don't have really deep value. And so let's talk about these numbers that appear in the Daniel Smith analysis of their paints. So and she was a Daniel Smith writer, so I assumed that all of these links were taking me to Daniel Smith paints. So L, L has to do with value. And it's sort of like just the opposite of what we think. Usually we do a scale 0 to 9, and we say 9 is the darkest, 0 is the lightest. Well, on their L, 100 is the lightest and 0 is the darkest. I don't know why they opted to do the scale in that direction. So you can see on Aurelian, oh, let me share my screen again. So on Aurelian, the L is 89. So it's a very light color. Cobalt blue is 66, so it's still in the lighter half, but it is, not anywhere near as light. Now, she really surprised me that she had a green, Viridian, as her third transparent, and that is at 72. So that is still pretty light in value. So you're not so they are very light colors. And on my first wash, as you've seen me do in many of my paintings, I'm looking for just establishing a light color on my paper. I might save a few whites with masking tape or fluid acrylic or masking fluid, but for the most part, I'm just wanting to get a pale tint. I think that it serves two purposes. It provides kind of an integrated color that's behind your painting. Now, I don't apply it so they're all blended together. I apply them somewhat individually, and I'll try to break this down a little bit more, but so that you can see, there's some areas that are slightly more yellow, other areas that are. So in my case, I am using quinacridone gold for my yellow, and of course quinacridone coral for my red, and then I'm using cobalt blue. And when I apply them, if I have an area that eventually is going to have some green colors in it, then when I put down, often I start with the cobalt blue. And the reason for that is cobalt blue is granulating. Now, in fact, it's interesting because it only says it's I guess I'm granulating. It's either granulating or non-granulating. They don't have a scale of how granulating is it. So frequently I start with the blue because if you have a granulating color that goes down first and a staining color that goes on top of it, and both Quin Coral and Quin Gold are low staining colors, you can typically lift those colors more easily if you have a granulating color underneath. Now, I don't put the granulating color down and let it dry, so I'm adding them at the same time and they're mixing on the paper. But I still find that if I need to get back to a white, I can get lighter if I've got the cobalt blue down first. I probably never mentioned that in the class anywhere. And then if I have a passage that I know this part of the painting is going to have some greenery in it, then I will allow the yellow to mingle with the blue because you're going to get a green. And if it's in the middle of a face or something, I don't really want green typically. So I am careful about where I let blue and yellow mix on my page. The Quin Coral is a really nice buffer. So if I want all three of them in there, I will frequently have the Quin Coral somewhere as a barrier in between where I put down the blue and where I put down the yellow, the gold, Quin Gold. And then I don't get any green at all if I don't want it. So you just sort of have to play with how you put it down and where it goes. Because remember, I wet my page first, then I throw the colors on, I'm tipping the paper, they're running around, it's all very out of control. But just by placing them on the paper a certain way, I know whether I'm going to get greens or not, and that's usually the only color that I might be avoiding. And another thing to know is that when you do work super wet like that, you can take a paper towel. And so say I'm working on a portrait and I ended up with some blues on the face. And I feel like they're a little bit darker than I might want the blues to be. Now, usually I just let them stay there because they're a little bit of, it ends up being like a little bit of shadow on the face and it doesn't really matter in the long run because it's so pale. But you can just blot it with a paper towel and all the color will come off and it'll be back to white if you do it while it's wet. So, and you might have to go back and blot multiple times because everything is super wet on your paper. So at that point, I have taken my board and I've laid it totally flat on the surface. It's no longer at a tilt because if it's at a tilt, then the paint's going to run down and intermingle into that area again. So the reason that I have this kind of greenish color highlight is those are the ones that I use in my first coat. I added that, I think, after I sent you guys the list, but I wanted to make sure that I mentioned that. So I have the quinacridone colors on the same page where I have the transparents, and those are typically my first three colors I put down. I do it because they are in my mind, they are extremely luminous colors. And the Quin Gold and the Quin Coral are both low staining, but they're also being applied very, very thinly. So even if they stain the paper, it's not going to really affect my painting. I can put other colors on top. It's not going to really affect those colors, once it's all dry, right? And you continue to work with more colors on top. But the thing that she talked about with transparency and the luminosity, that applies to the quinacridone colors as well. So the paint is going to go through those layers of color that you have in your final painting. It's going to bounce back off, and those colors in that first layer are going to add a lot of glow to your painting, even though visually you don't notice those colors, they're still causing that reaction of, and a lot of people say to me, why do your paintings glow so much? And that's why they glow so much, is that first coat of painting. Okay. Let's see. I also highlighted on the quinacridones the ones that were medium or high staining. It's interesting to me. I think I have probably played with all of, well, I know Quin Rose is in my palette. I don't use it that often because of the fact that it's staining, and it can be hard to get off, even if you know, whether wet or dry, it's pretty hard to get off. And so I I know I own Quin Violet. I don't think I ever use it, and the same with Quin Magenta. I own it, but I think I decided it caused me more work than it was worth for the way that I paint. Um, and then you all know I use Quin Burnt Orange all the time. Let's see. So I didn't talk a whole lot about the sedimentary colors, but other than the fact that very often, so many years ago, I took a workshop, so still fairly early in my learning. So maybe 4 years into my learning watercolor, I took a workshop from Chenkichi. And I don't know if you all know who Chenkichi is, but he is this fabulous. He was born in China. He moved here, I think, in his teens. Um, he's probably best known for his koi fish painting, although he paints all kinds of things. And the workshop that I took was a 4 day. Can't remember if it was a 4 or 5 day workshop, but it was called From East to West. And he had us each day, we were working in a different style of painting. So we started with very Chinese-like painting styles, and then, you know, slate a little bit more of Western influence, but still a little, you know, more out of the box for Western watercolor painters, and then a little more Western. And then at the end, it was pretty much the way Western watercolorists like us in the US tend to paint. So it was really very, very informative workshop. And one of the things I remember him mentioning was a thing that I said about the first wash. If you have granulating color in that first wash, and he tended to use pretty strong colors in his first wash for his koi fish painting. So that was what he was demonstrating that day. And I think it was ultramarine blue that he was using. And so he put that down first, and then he threw all these other staining colors on top of it. And the way that he worked is he would look at how the paint ended up, and he would say, okay, I see a koi fish here. And he would lift out some whites on where, because the koi always have some whites on them. He would lift, and he knew what koi fish looked like. So he could just, without, you know, nothing was pre-drawn. He would just lift out, okay, I want to have koi fish here, and I want to have koi fish over here. And he'd lift that out. And then he would, you know, let the whole thing dry. And then he would continue to build up color in order to do the full painting. So that's when I kind of learned about, if you got these sedimentary or granulating colors early on in your painting, you'll typically be able to get back to white pretty easily. I think that's pretty much what I wanted to say with regard to that in her article. So, you know, she talked about, you know, what order do you put them down, and, you know, how the painting is going to look. And I think that is something that you just learn over time, and you learn. So, for example, well, when I did that painting last term that had It was the one with all the umbrellas at that, so when there was the umbrellas in the outside area, and then there was a couple of umbrellas that you could see over in a little seating area in front of the restaurant. When I did that, all the green, which was the kind of the first thing I worked on because it was an outside scene and it was all that green that was surrounding the umbrellas. I used very granulating colors for that. So in that case, I did not use quinacridone gold in my first wash. I used raw sienna, and I happen to like Winsor Newton's raw sienna more than I like Daniel Smith's. So it was Winsor Newton's raw sienna. I still had the cobalt blue, and I think those were the main colors I used in that first wash. Now, while it was still wet, I flicked in some other darker greens that Daniel Smith makes, like the shadow green. Um, might have used some of their spring green in areas where I knew I wanted to have, where the light was really hitting and I wanted some lighter colors. But most of that first wash was just the cobalt blue and the Winsor Newton, because I knew if I needed to lift some areas out, I would be able to do that. They were both granulating, and I knew that they worked well together. They made a decent green. Cobalt and ultramarine don't make pretty greens. They make kind of muted greens. Um, so that's why I don't use those blends for my entire painting, but they were fine for the first wash. Okay, so any questions on that before I move on? You guys are all muted, so don't forget to unmute yourselves if you want to ask anything.
April, I'm pretty sure this is a stupid question, actually.
No such thing.
Yeah, well, way back 15 minutes ago, you were talking about your first wash with the triads. And I think, is it true that the paper is, you first wet the paper and then everything is applied on wet paper?
Well, that's typically what I do, not every single painting.
Hmm.
Sometimes, if a scene needs to be a little bit more controlled than that, then I may not do that over the whole painting. I might do it only in a particular area of the painting.
I
Um,
guess part of
that,
this,
that's hard for me to be able to give you examples because I'd have to go back and kind of like restudy paintings.
yeah, no, I can appreciate that, but I guess the question, this concept of glazing where you put one color on the other, you put one color on a dried wash. That's not what you do, I imagine, in your first stage.
No, the first wash is usually wet paper, wet paint.
Yeah,
And I'm adding all the colors at the same time so they also get to mingle with themselves
right,
out of my control, really. I mean, it can pseudo control it. Like I said, I can keep the blue away from the yellow if I don't want to get green.
right,
But for the most part, the paint and the water are doing whatever they want to do.
right. Okay. Thank you.
Hey, April, I
Uh-huh.
was reading a book the other day and I can't remember what artist it was, a portrait artist. And she was saying that she likes to use staining colors in the first wash, just because even if they're dry, and I've had this problem too, like even if they're dry and you go to put another color on top, you're pulling them up sometimes and then
Yeah,
getting muddy, you know?
and I think that was why Carolyn's article to me seemed a little contradictory, because at one point I thought she started with the transparent colors, and then in another point in the article I thought she said she started with the staining colors. And I think the staining colors are good for a couple reasons. If if you're not worried about being able to lift back to white, staining colors are nice because they're not granulating, right? I mean, it's just really nice, pretty raw colors, right? And so you can still mix them on the page And you can go, and your options are limitless, right? I mean, you could have a dry piece of paper, and if you work quickly enough, you can still let the colors mingles on the page. You just kind of have to keep moving your brush quickly enough and, changing your colors often enough that you sort of get that same result.
I think it makes more sense on landscapes to be able to pick up because you want to be able to pick up on landscapes a lot of times. But with portraits, you're going over even after it's dry. And sometimes I have the problem where
Yeah.
I'm picking up the color
And
again.
I certainly have had that problem as well. And so actually I'll have to start paying more attention on the colors I'm using on my portraits to see
Me too. I think I'm going to
how much
try
are they
maybe some
staining and how much
staining
aren't they.
under.
Yeah. Now, so I was looking at Pam Wenger's supply list because she's going to be teaching those classes for BWS here soon. And she had lots of Holbein colors, which have a lot of white in them, and they tend to be easily lifting. I haven't paid attention to whether they granulate or not, because I use them sparingly, so I don't have enough wash to get that sense of whether they granulate. Um, so I don't think her palette, I wonder if I have that handy. I did have it out the other day. I don't see it here right off the top of my head. I'll have to look for it again, but I don't think she does use staining. So, and she has really, I was surprised at how many of the Holbein colors she was using now. So she has changed her palette from when I took like a 1 day quick sketch portrait thing with her. And yeah, I don't know that her colors are staining.
Can't remember what book I was reading, but I thought that was interesting because I've had the same problem where then something turns kind of muddy because you,
Yes.
yeah.
Yes, and I've had that problem too. When I look around my studio, a fair number of my portraits I did in fluid acrylic. So a layer dries, it's dried, right? That's not moving no matter what the color is and what the properties of the paint are. Um, but I do notice when I'm doing watercolor portraits, I have to be a lot more careful to be just super gentle
I
with
may
the
be
brush.
getting it too wet when I put the next color on. So that could be too, but it's hard not to pick up colors that are so
Yeah,
non-staining.
yeah, I agree. And so I think that'll be something interesting to sort of play around with.
Yeah.
Because I haven't consciously thought about it when I know what mixtures I think will get the right skin tone for whatever that person's complexion is. And I would have to go back and look at my skin tone color charts, which are not here. They're over in my bin at the moment. But I bet they're not staining colors.
There are some artists that are so good at getting the color right that they're not going over it and over it. I
Yeah,
watched this little Mary White video and she puts the colors on so dark that she doesn't have to go back and keep going over them.
yeah,
But you just need to know what is the right,
yeah. Okay, let's see. Any other questions before I go on to this color thingy that I mentioned I think in one of the step-by-step documents I sent out referred to this having figured out a color scheme beforehand. And this is the application or the online service that I use. I'll throw this link in the chat. I think I might have sent it to you, but I'm not sure. Now, this system was designed for graphic design website designers. So I find it always really interesting. The color wheel on the left is all these really bright colors like we're used to talking about. And in this one, I happen to use, so it has a lot of flexibility, and it's hard to see it when it's, I don't think I can blow this up larger. Let's make sure I'm over here. I can blow it up a little bit. That's probably as good as it's going to be. There's these little options up here, and I will click on a different one here in a minute. But right now I'm on the analogous color scheme option. And that basically means, so when you click on it, oh, it might not move because I've already set these. You can grab these, and the primary right now is red because it tells you in the center which color it's considering the primary that it's working off of. You can grab it and rotate it, and you can say, well, gee, maybe I want a red orange. Well, you know, yellow always looks green in their little renderings on the right. You never really get a clean yellow, which is, I'll talk about that.
April,
Yeah.
the only thing I'm seeing right now is a latte cup with a bear. Is that, am I?
Because that's not what I was sharing, but let me start over again and how's that?
Now I see it. Yeah.
Yeah, so I happen to be on the analogous option up here, which is, you know, you've got a central color and then you have these little wing things that you can move around, but they're the whole idea of an analogous color scheme is you're using colors that are all adjacent to each other. So the reason that I am showing you this, and I had it spread out a little bit more, rotate it here a little bit. Let's, okay, so here you can see one of the color schemes that I like is purple, orange, and green. So if you do the analogous and you get all of the associated colors, they have a little box here that you can click on and it will add the complement. So now I have my purple, orange, and green. And you know, it's not like I don't allow other colors in. Those are just the predominant colors in those paintings. Now, let's talk about the thing on the right. Because they are focused on people who are designing websites, they mute all the colors. So the colors over here never look like the colors you selected. So I, for the most part, ignore the right part. They have some different visions, simulation things here, but I don't feel like when I select between them that I get anything that really changes all that much. One thing that I do sometimes do is I'll go to this view because I like how it shows the variations within the, you know, the purple, the green, orange is never orange. For some reason, orange and yellow are always these horrible muted colors. But it gives me a little bit more thought on some variations that I might want to consider when I'm doing the painting. But for the most part, I kind of ignore this right half of the screen. I just wait until I can find something that I kind of like. And then they have, you know, then they have other ones that are triads. And so you can, you know, you can be working based on the red, yellow, blue, or you can rotate it and say, well, let's do this tertiary, which is orange, green, and this darker, more like a phthalo blue. No, I guess this is more like almost more like a royal blue. Or you could do secondaries, and you've got these colors, which is actually a yellow, purple, and green. So it just sort of gives me a chance to just sort of look at different variations and figure out what might I want to use on this painting. Now, I used to use this a lot, and I now I seldom actually come in here. They also have where you can select a single color and then add the complement and just explore, what complements might I want to just do a painting that's only in the two complements, and those are actually very interesting paintings. That's something you might want to play around with at some point. And then they've got also this 4 color option, and you can always, let's see. Oh, you can change what your center primary color is. So say I wanted it to be more blue. You click on here, and over on the right, it's going to show you, well, if you're going with a blue variant, then that's what it would kind of look like. But again, in these muted colors. Now I'm supposed to be able, there we go. You can widen the spacing between the two complements. So now I've got yellow purple with the orange blue. I don't know that I've ever done a painting in that color scheme, but I just wanted you to know you can play with these in terms of how far apart they are. So this is almost like doing 2 analogous colors because you got the blue purple and the yellow orange. And that, I think I have done some paintings that I had the double analogous kind of a scheme to them. So I considered it more of a food for thought when I was starting a painting, and I didn't really want to use the colors in the photograph. I think it was probably when I was first trying to pull myself away from just copy the picture, because I wasn't being terribly creative when I was doing that. And so I would have to, once I decided on a color scheme, I had 2 options. I could print it out my source in black and white so that I wasn't influenced by it, or I could go into Photoshop and I would change the colors of things in order to be using the color scheme I had. So actually, this just reminded me, did I share with you guys the tenement picture? I don't think I did. Let me go find that painting.
You were mentioning, I think, when I was talking to you about my last painting, that I should use cerulean because it's more opposite the orange I was using, which makes sense. I mean, it makes sense to look at the color wheel and see, okay, the blue I was using isn't really the complement of the other color, and it's much more vibrant if you use the actual complement.
Right. And I'm glad you brought that up because not everybody actually knows why the complements are good to use together. So there's a whole lot of different ways to design your artwork, and one of them is to put complements next to each other, especially in your focal point, because they kind of cause your eye to vibrate when you got 2 complements next to each other, and therefore it by default draws the viewer to look at your focal point. You might not want, you're going to still want to have those colors somewhere else in your painting, so they're not only in one spot, but they might be slightly more muted versions of each other. But that is one way to draw attention to your focal point. And complements are kind of a really nice way to do that. Let me keep looking for this painting here. And I'll give you a little story about how I ended up with this painting the way it is. I have it here. I try to sort my work so that I can, like landscapes and figures, but there's every now and then there's a painting that it's sort of, I don't know where to put it. And those are always the ones that are like, where did I end up deciding to put that painting? This must apparently be in that category. Oh, wait a minute. I think it's the tenement, not just tenement. Oh. I'm going to show it to you there. Let me go. This is the painting. I wish I had found the folder where it is because so the photo that I took was actually of a white building, and the shadows were just, grays and blacks. And I took it because I liked the shadows. And I started playing around with it in Photoshop, and I had made a decision that I was going to use a double complement. So there was the orange with the blue, and then there is, although it's hard to see because a lot of the yellow got covered with orange, but there was also the yellow purple complement when I started. The yellow kind of disappeared. So I am working on selecting areas of the photo, and I've got I don't remember if I had all the lights currently highlighted or if I had all of the darks currently selected. But in Photoshop, you can sort of select by value. And, I'm putting these colors in, and by accident, I hit this filter that was called invert. And invert took all the lights and made them darks, and all the darks and made them lights. And I was like, wow, that's a really cool painting. So this window was not white. This was a totally black window you couldn't see into. And all of the purpley, dark part was the white building. And then the dark shadows became the orange. So it was totally by accident that I ended up with this design. And then I liked it so much, that's how I ended up painting it. So in that case, playing in Photoshop and making accidentally grabbing something wrong got me what I ended up really liking and what I ended up painting. So you never know what's gonna end up happening, but I think it probably started because this painting is old enough that I was probably playing in this tool. I came across this color scheme. I said, oh, that's kind of interesting. I kind of like that idea. And then the next thing you know, I had that painting. So my inspiration isn't always totally out of my head. Sometimes it's quite accidental. Um, so that's what that tool was all about. Let's see. Let me just go ahead and close that. I don't think I need that anymore. Most of you have already seen this. Daniel Smith has this interactive color map. I currently have it frozen so that it's not rotating. And I wanted to talk about this because this is where I went in and I got all of that additional information about actually, let me go to something else first. All right. This is how it used to work. And so Daniel Smith, up until they created this interactive color map, had all of these sheets. You could go and download their spec sheets. And for every single color, they told you, so let me see if I can, how much I can blow this one up. They told you everything you ever wanted to know about this paint. So this is what the tube says. This is its actual common pigment name, which in most cases are the same. This is the actual pigment, the primary pigments that are used within the paint. And so you can see quite a few are single pigments, a few are double pigments, and then there's going to be a few that have got 3 pigments in them. What their light fastness is, their staining property, their granulation property, and their transparency. The available is just what size tube are they in. So this is 15 millimeter versus 5 millimeter. And I forget what the S is. I don't remember. Actually, okay, so, and then the other thing that you could do is if you went to their website, you could bring up their color version of their spec sheet, and it kind of gives you the same information. This is not a great resolution image. And I couldn't find my source document that I had downloaded from them. So it's a little bit hard to read, but they kind of gave you all the same information, but they used all these little symbols in order to tell you a bunch of stuff. And they had a definition, I think, at the bottom of the page. Well, somewhere in there. I only put one page in here on this document, but this little symbol here that looks like a half moon. I don't know if you can see my cursor or not. I'm over, well, I'm on the top row, the second one in from the right, the little half circle symbol. Let's see if I can remember. That means it's semi-transparent. If you go to the left, where it's solid black, that means it's opaque. And then right below that is one that's open up, and that means it's a transparent color. The ends mean it's non-granulating. Somewhere we'll find one that doesn't say N. I'm seeing one on this sheet. Let's see, the light fastness. Since so many other, okay, so I think the very first thing is the light fastness. 1 is the excellent category. If I come down, 1, 2, 3, 6 rows, and I kind of come over 3, organic vermilion has got 2, and that is the very good rating. But like I said earlier, they've only got 3 paintings that are fugitive, and they have none that are in the good category. So almost all of their paints are either extremely light fast or have a good rating, which is probably well, there's 2 reasons that I got attracted by Daniel Smith. One was the light fastness, and one was I guess I fell in love with the quinacridones, and they seem to have a really great assortment of quinacridones. When I first started painting, I found them about a year into painting, and so I have been a Daniel Smith fan since. I don't even remember what I started out with. I probably had some Winsor Newton, because like I said, almost everybody was using Winsor Newton at that time, and I quickly transitioned to Daniel Smith. with a few exceptions where I still like Winsor Newton better. So that was kind of all we had was those two things there. Another thing that you can order, but I'm not recommending that you do. You can, I think these I was given. You can get these color dots. So they actually just squeeze a little dot of paint of these different colors onto a sheet, and then you can use that to test colors and see if you like them and their properties. On these dot things, they still use those same symbols. And oh yeah, and on the back, they do define what each symbol means. They do have it all broken out here on the back. So had that transparency right. Yeah, so if it was granulating, it would have been a Y for yes, granulating. So here's one, James Gray.
James Gray.
So this happens. I'm echoing again, and I don't know why, but I will sit over here. Apparently, when I lean in that direction, there must be something over there that's picking me up.
That was me. Sorry.
Oh, okay. So this happens to be Jane Blundell is the woman who does those blogs about color, and that she gets all kinds of free samples from every paint manufacturer out there, and she tests them out and she does little write-ups on them. She's from Australia. And then so is Joseph Zbukvic. I forget where he's originally from, but he's lived in Australia for many, many years. He is masterful. I mean, if you like Thomas Schaller, you would also love Joseph Zbukvic. His paintings are really, really quite wonderful. And he has a certain set of paints that are his favorites, and Daniel Smith loves to go grab those people who are super well known, who are famous, and put together a little palette that they use, and then they sell those little sample, they sell little kits that are just their colors. I think I was given these, which leads me up to, what's this? Oops, there was one more thing in there. Oops, let me go back. It closed. I'm laughing because if you were watching me traverse through my umpteen thousand folders on my website, you would be amused, I think. Here is the last. Oh yeah, no. That's that. We don't need Photoshop. So these things that I was given, I believe, so back in 2019, Daniel Smith came in for Baltimore Watercolor Society, and they brought all of these wonderful gemstones with them because a lot of their paints are derived truly from stones. All of their Primatech series are from there, and they brought in all kinds of things, and they brought in a bunch of paint, and they had a bunch of handouts. So I'm thinking most likely I got the Joseph Zbukvic and the Jane Blundell dot cards probably at that event. But they went around, so I think they provided us with a piece of paper and a cup to put water in, And I can't remember if we brought our own brushes or if they also lent us brushes. But they would come around and they would give us a dot of different colors that they were talking about. And so this was what I created that day in that workshop. And so you would get this little dot of color, and then what I would do with it was, I would put a little bit of water in it and make as dark a color as I could, add a little more water, go a little lighter with a little more water. And some of them I was able to stretch out further. Most of the time I only got 3 because I knew I was going to run out of paper if I did too many. Well, at the top of the screen, you may have noticed they are coming back March 27th this year. And it's a $10 event. The stuff they hand out to you is probably worth $10. And I wanted you all to know that that was going to be happening because I know a bunch of you have joined Baltimore Watercolor Society, and I think it's a really good presentation to attend. He's very, very informative. He's one of their reps that travels the country and talks about their paints and talks about the properties of their paints. And it was very informative. And it's only a 2-hour session, as I recall. This doesn't really say how long it is, but I think it's only 2 hours. So I'd wanted you all to be aware. It's going to be 2 people per table, same as what we've been doing here. Probably 44 people in the class. So if you want to bring a mask, certainly you can do that. That's not required. EWS during the pandemic was requiring everybody wear masks, but now we don't require it and just leave it up to each individual person. So I found that a very, very informative experience. And so I do highly recommend it. The same guy is coming back. Okay, so the only other thing I was going to go through was this a little bit. And I wanted to talk about this because it's an extremely informative tool. So I have it frozen because I wanted to show you something in particular. So this axis is the red to green axis. So colors over here, the further over to the right, which is a positive A. Don't ask me why this axis is A, but axis is A. Positive A's are red colors. The more red they are, the more to the far right they are. Green is negative A. So at the center, you go back to 0, and then as the green number builds up, then you get darker and darker greens. Same thing for yellow and blue. Yellow is at the top, blue is at the bottom. So positive, and that's their B axis. I don't know why they didn't just use X, Y, but they didn't. So B is if you had any math in your background, that's the Y axis. Positive B's are yellow, negative B's are blue. So I just thought this was sort of an interesting, weird thing that I kind of discovered playing with this. So I am constantly using Quin Burnt Orange, and I'm going to add this to a compare thing. And I mix Quin Burnt Orange typically with French Ultramarine Blue. And if we look at those colors, so they're both granulating, and I don't know why, but I do sort of like that. I guess because I use them not only to mix black, but I also use them to mix browns, and browns are often like on trees. And so I think I like the granulating properties because of that. I never consciously did that. I think I took some class somewhere along the line that said, oh, you use those colors, you'll get a nice black. And so I started doing it. But looking now, now that I can look at more properties, it's sort of interesting to see. So the L is the how dark is the color, and L is the one where 100 is the lightest and 0 is the darkest. And you can see both of these are kind of in the middle. They're not super dark colors. Now, when I look at them, if I paint them without much water in them, they look really dark to me. So I was surprised that, I don't know at what level of dilution they do their testing in order to come up with these numbers, but they're kind of in the middle. So then that got me wondering, and I don't know if I can go back. If I can go back. I think I have to start over. Okay, let's start over with the interactive then. So this is the non-interactive one. I guess I can try to do this here. So I can find them. I know where they are in the other one. Let me go to 3D because I know where they are. I don't want it to rotate, so I stopped the rotation. But I do want to have it tilted. Whoops. So the yellows are at the top and the blues are at the bottom. Okay, that's just wanted to make sure. And and so if I click on the bare white, popping up, oh, you are popping up, you're just popping way up here. So this is their, I don't think it'll let me move this. What's this color? Oh, it's being a pain. Popping everything up above where I can see it. I guess, okay, so I think it's titanium white. So it's at, oh no, I didn't get titanium white. It's at 97 for its darkness. Oops. I must say it's a little bit tricky controlling the rotation. Okay, so this is, there it is. There's Book the Quinburn Orange. So you can see it's kind of at the halfway point. So I was playing around earlier trying to figure out, well, if I wanted to do a test where, actually I'm going to reduce this so it fits on here better. Sort of shrinking, sort of not shrinking. Let's see if I can do this. Now, at any rate, so I thought, well, it'd be nice to find sort of a color that's sort of in that same family that's darker. And so, Garnet Genuine is a little bit darker. If I come all the way down here, I'm worried that these are a little bit too blue already, but maybe not. I'd like to see if I can find a color that I actually own. Might have to tilt it. Okay. I used to have raw umber violet, but that was a tube that always dried out really hard. And a friend of mine suggested, she suggested that I take it out of the tube. This is not the one, but notice the top is not in here, right? Well, anyway, she said, whenever you have a tube that dries out and it's, it's just a block, then get a pill bottle, get the paint, cut the paint out of the tube. So, you have to use a knife in order to get into that metal tube. Pull it out, throw it in a pill bottle and add water to it. And then you have your paint back. So I'm pretty sure I did that for that color, but I'm not seeing it up here at the moment. It's probably buried in the back somewhere. So it is a really nice color. Where did that go off to? So I might have it. I'm just not sure. But let's add that to the compare. So original compare had this is the orange, this is the blue. And then I thought, well, what other blue down here? Now, I wanted to have a blue that was still granulating, and I think I found that this dark Mayan blue, no, that says non-granulating. Maybe it was Prussian blue. Yeah. If we look at the compare now, so these are the two I've been using. I'm thinking it might be fun to experiment with using those two to see, can I get blacks and browns with those two? And is it easier to get to the darks? I've been using these two for so long. I doubt it because I'm so used to using those and I know I got to use a whole lot of blue in order to get to the dark I want. But if you look at the L ratings down here, the two I've been using are 61 and 51, so they're actually just above the middle of the darkness range, whereas this one is down at 38 and this one's down at 44, so they're much darker to begin with, and it might be faster. So I'm actually going to probably try to do an experiment. I think I don't know that if I have Daniel Smith's Prussian blue, but I know I have somebody else's Prussian blue. And I think I have this color, so that's something that I think I'm gonna play with. So all of that just to say that I think that interactive color map is a good resource if you want to go playing around and testing out, well, gee, the paint I'm using doesn't exactly have the properties I want. Now it's only for Daniel Smith products, so that's a limitation, but I do think it's a handy thing to play with.
April,
Yeah.
I was reading a book by Hazel Sohn. She's got some great books. And she was saying that you have to have transparent colors to get really dark, which I thought was interesting. And I noticed those colors that you had up there just now were transparent. But if you were using opaque colors, you can get really, really dark, like using the complements or whatever.
And I think that's because opaques frequently have white in them.
Oh, true.
And so that you just can't get them darker. Now, I don't know if all opaques are, there might be some of the ones that are made from real stones that might be opaque. I don't know. On the tube, they don't give you as much information. So I can't tell, because I happen to have some of the Primatech paints that I've bought that are still sitting on my desk, and yeah, you can't tell. Oh, one thing I forgot to mention that was in the Zoltan Szaba book. I don't think I got to the page where I was showing staining and non-staining with you, so let me stop sharing, because I think I've covered all the documents and stuff I was going to cover. Oh, I'm still spotlighted, so I don't have to do that. Okay, so this was his staining and non-staining. So on the staining side, Oh, okay, so apparently what he did was he took each color and he made a block that was this shape, this rhombus shape. And so each color was those full areas that we can see here. Here was the yellow one, and here was, what color is that? Magenta. So he kind of built a star, except the bottom part of the star was white. And then he came and he worked on it to lift the color out. So this was on the staining. No. Yeah, this was the non-staining ones. And so he was able to lift the color out almost completely on this one here, but there was still a little bit of this color left. And he said in here that he was doing all of these images were taken with him working on, he was working on Waterford cold press. Now, Waterford cold press does not have a lot of the sizing on the page. So sizing is the thing that is used to kind of partially seal the watercolor paper and help it to not just suck all the colors in, into the paper, but allow it to some of the colors to lie on top. And he said that had he been using arches, that the sizing that's on arches allows you to lift much better, which I thought was interesting because when I looked at these pictures, I thought, well, wow, those non-staining colors, he's really not getting back to white. And I think I usually get almost all the way back to white. Well, I'm almost always working on arches. So apparently, not only does the paint differ from manufacturer to manufacturer, but so does the paper. And so when I talk about what I can do with my paper, it's based on mostly using arches. I mean, I do occasionally use one of the other papers just to try it out, but I almost always end up back at arches. He did the same thing for the staining colors, which is this side of the page. And he was still actually able to lighten some. So, this was lightened to that, this was lightened to that. Not quite as light as he got on the non-staining, but more than I expected. And let's see, did he say? He did let it dry first. That's what I wanted to check. And he said, so after it was dry, he loosened the pigment with a very wet brush. So that's like when I'm always talking about, use the tip of your brush and kind of scrub a little bit on it, on the paper, and then use paper towel to blot it out. So he's basically using that same approach. But then he also did say somewhere in here that even on the staining side, where there's a little bit more left, that typically as you build up your layers, and this is similar to what I described on my first layer of my painting, where I put down these light colors to kind of just establish something underneath. That once you put darker colors around these light areas, they're almost going to read as white anyhow. So even on the ones that were staining, he probably got them back light enough where, well, not on this yellow one. The yellow one's still pretty yellow, but it probably would fool the eye. And even if it was a staining one, you could get it light enough to make it read kind of like white on your painting. So I was surprised at that, but again, he's not using Daniel Smith's paint, and so it's because every paint works slightly different. I would have to try that test myself to see whether or not it works. This is a pretty cool book. So that was chapter 1. He also talked about dominance, and this I wasn't really going to go into, but he's just talking about if you're mixing colors, and I think you've all experienced this. So this top row here, where he's got the green He's got phthalo green and permanent rose. So permanent rose, it was in his transparent category, and then phthalo green was in the staining category. And he talked about, depending on your blend, if you had a lot of the rose, even though it's a much lighter color and it's non-staining, it's very transparent, that if you swamp it with a lot of, so this was sort of this first mark was a 50-50 combination of the two. Here he added more of the rose and got, I don't know how well it's coming through on the camera, but he got a pretty nice violet color. And then he went more heavily on the green and he got a very muted green color. And I mean, that's just basic mixing colors. If you can swamp one out with another. So when you're using two colors, if you're not seeing exactly the color you're after, if you just keep adjusting the ratio, you can probably get whatever it was you were after in the first place. You just have to play until you find the right ratio. And the reason that I don't mix enormous pools of color is in my painting, I want there to be variations within the color. And so a lot of the times, maybe I'll mix some of it on my palette, but then once I really get going on my paper, I'll just start putting the colors down on the paper and letting them mix on the paper so that I have a variety of, it's all in that same family. It's the same two colors. If I want to push it a little bit more, I could add a little bit more of that permanent rose. But it's going to have more variation. So if you have a larger, somewhat semi-large area that you're using that color on, by not mixing this big, huge tank of that color, you have a lot of variety within that space, and it's a lot more interesting to look at. So the dominance was just talking about which one you have more of in your mix and what color you're going to get as a result. And then this last thing that he covered, which was actually something I didn't remember from having read this before, but he took now he was using two staining colors. In the first application, he put the alizarin down first, let that dry. On this one, he put the green down first, let that dry. Then he came back and on the alizarin one, he painted the green over it. Okay, I think he let that dry first also. And on this one, he put the red over the green and let that dry. And then he made a blend of the two. And he was, working, I think he tried to make an equal part blend of the two, which is going to be a pretty dark neutral. That's another way of making blacks, by the way. And he put that over the top of each of these, and then only that was over here. And when the whole thing was dry, he came back and he did lifting. And on the one where he started with the red, he got a kind of a pinkish tint in the center. This here, he got a greenish tint. And over here, he just got kind of a pale neutral. So this one to me looks the most white. So I thought that was really interesting that, when he was putting down just a single swath of the mixture, that he was still able to get back pretty well to a white, even though these are staining colors. So I have never tried that test. And that was pretty much it in that first chapter about the properties of paints. Okay, so the color, so the palettes that he had. So we had a Winsor Newton palette. He had a palette of Block X, which is a Belgian company apparently. And then he had a palette that was the Italian one I mentioned earlier, which is MERI. And he showed his three different palettes. So I don't remember which of those he was using in the book. the next chapter is actually on reflections and how reflections work. And I do remember reading that chapter because it was really, really informative. So the whole book, I really do think it's a great book. And he just really breaks it down into pieces really well on whatever topic he's talking about. The third chapter was composition and design. The fourth chapter was basic techniques at a glance, so I don't know exactly what that one is. And then chapter 5 is more on watercolor techniques. That one's fairly long. Actually, that one's really long. So that must be the main body of the book, which is the title of the book anyway. So yeah, it's pretty good. I looked it up. It is available through Amazon. It's just under $11, so you might be interested in getting that. Okay, so how long did we just go? 2.5 hours. No, 1.5 hours. A little longer than I thought. Anybody else have any other?
April, what's the title? April, what's the title of that?
Yeah, it's 70 favorite watercolor techniques. And the author, I put his name in the chat earlier. So you can see the spelling is Zoltan, Zoltan, and Szabo is Szaba. He's originally from Hungary. And at this point, I don't know if he's still alive or not, but he was born in 1928, so he may no longer be with us. I searched around in this book, and I think the first publication was back in it was in 1995, and the last printing was in 2011. Or actually, the last copyright was in 2011, so that could be, if he has passed, his family may have renewed the copyright, which families are allowed to do. So, any other questions? Way more talking than I would normally do, obviously, in class. So it was sort of nice to have a day that we could do this. We'll still have a class. We'll figure out a class somewhere where you guys can come here and paint, and we can do our normal, I won't do a talk that day. I will do our normal painting time.
That was excellent. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Super.
Thank you. It was great. Learned a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was
I
very
was
helpful.
worried if it might be too much, but
No.
you're often asking, how do I do things? And so it gave me a chance to talk a little bit about that too.
Yeah, it's great. Thank you.
Thank you.
It was a little more like when I was doing my mentorship classes, and I would, so the way that those classes worked was we never met in person. So people would paint at home. They would send me images of their paintings. They may just give me whatever stage they were at, or they might give me a series of, here's how I got here, and this is where I'm at, along with some questions they had on that particular piece. Or maybe it was just a question on another topic. There were typically only 4 or 5 people in the mentorship at a time. And so the first thing I would do is we would go through what they provided. I would answer their questions, and I would go through each of the 4 people. And then things that needed a demo that they asked, then I would switch and I would work on a demo for them to try to answer, give an example of some of the questions they had. And then if I still had time, then I would just demonstrate something else. So I think they were 3-hour classes too. Can't remember for sure. Maybe they were only 2.
I have a question.
Yeah.
When you're playing around with trying to develop the colors you want or how to do your washes, should you be using good paper or can you use any kind of thick paper that won't fall apart?
Usually, I buy these, well, actually, here's one that's not even open yet. So I buy these little watercolor journals and
Okay.
happens to be 5x5. This is one that's already open of the same.
Uh-huh.
The paper is, it's not Arches, but it's decent watercolor paper.
Okay.
May not be, it's probably not 100%. No, this is only 25% cotton. Which I wouldn't recommend for doing paintings on, but it works
Mhm.
testing out colors and seeing
Okay.
colors play together. And I still use these for that. Now, I mean, and they come in all shapes and sizes, so I've got them in all kinds of different formats, but it's whichever one is cheaper at the moment when I go to buy them is what I buy. And I find it definitely worthwhile. If I'm going to start a painting and I'm using colors I haven't used in a while, I'll do that first just to kind of remind myself how do they play together? How do I get some of the blends that I think I want to use and stuff? It's well worth spending a little bit of time on that before you hit the painting,
Yeah.
I think. Because otherwise you get halfway through the painting and you realize, oops. Well, that didn't
April?
work.
Do you happen to know, just off the top of your head, the difference between French ultramarine and ultramarine? Because I
So I
have both.
Yeah, I can answer it for Daniel Smith, because he happened to talk about that. Um, I believe what he told us was the French ultramarine was ground finer, so the particles were smaller. But interestingly, it granulates more, which seemed counterintuitive to me. I would have thought the bigger particles would have granulated more. But I think I could be remembering it wrong too, but I think he said the smaller particles were granulated more and you've got more
Hmm.
granulation. And I've just always used French ultramarine and I've gotten
So that's what you typically use,
colors.
French.
That's what I use, and the colors vary slightly. If I still have this color wheel thing up here, so let me go back, or not color wheel, but let me share again just briefly. That's the ultramarine. And that's the French ultramarine, and this is the regular ultramarine, and they're really different,
Ah,
at least in Daniel Smith's brand. Um, so, but I mean, I think when I use it really saturated out of the, just, a little tiny bit of water out of the tube, it's a lot darker than this. And even though I know they have a document where they talk about exactly how they do their testing and how much they dilute and all of this, that, and the other, it's like, that wasn't that interesting to me. So I didn't present that to you guys.
but you typically use French ultramarine.
I do. Um, I don't even know if I own a tube of regular ultramarine, to be honest with you. So, that is what I typically use. Let me stop spotlighting myself. Anything else? Okay, well, that was more than long enough. So, yeah, next week, I guess we're supposed to get snow on Tuesday and Wednesday. The latest forecast my husband tells me is somewhere 8 to 10 inches. The good news about 8 to 10 inches is the guy who plows our driveway will come if it's over 4 inches. So he will be plowing us out. So depending on how the rest of you are doing, hopefully we can meet next week to catch up on this. If not, we'll just, you know, maybe it'll be after what was originally supposed to be the fourth week. We'll find a time to meet again so that you can paint and we can do our normal back and forth on your paintings. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey,
Thanks.
bye.